Welcome to the Bhagavad Gita in Action podcast. I guess we call it the Gita in Action podcast. We are here every Monday and Thursday studying the Gita together, and we are making our way through it. We started this journey, in August? Many of you have been here with me since August, and we are on chapter 4 now. Chapter 4 of the Gita. We're starting a new chapter today. And this chapter is called Transcendental Knowledge. And we're reading the Bhagavad Gita as it is. So we'll just go ahead and get right into it. We'll get into the first verse. 1 second, let me pull it up on my screen. Okay, share screen. All right. So this verse says, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, Vivishwan, and Vivishwan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind. And Manu, in turn, instructed it to Ishvaku. Okay, so this verse, it may seem like, we're getting into this new chapter. It seems like a change of theme. Chapter 1 really focused on like Arjuna's observation of the army and his lamentation. And chapter 2 was more of a summary of the Gita with a call to Arjuna to act with detachment. Right? Chapter 3 focused on the rationale for karma yoga from various perspectives. Right? We talked about why karma is needed at the lowest level for self-subsistence, and karma yoga being detached action. Right? At the next level, it's in cosmic cooperation. Right? We want to be in harmony with our environment, with society, with we give and they give back in this cosmic cooperation. That's how we relate to God, rather. And then we talked about setting an example, right? Even if you're detached, do your work anyway to set an example. And then verses 36 through 43 at the very end was a discussion on the self-destructive desire, right? Self-destructive desire of lust, which turns into anger when it's not satisfied. And then from there, where it is and what we do about it, right? So that was chapter 3. So the first verse of chapter 4 seems like the theme has gone towards history, right? But Krishna is saying that this knowledge of how to act dutifully and conquer lust has been provided to humanity by divinity since time immemorial. So he's kind of giving like the backdrop for it now. Right? He's saying that he gave knowledge in succession, right? Krishna is saying that he gave the knowledge in succession. This knowledge of karma yoga and how to combat desires is timeless. And he's establishing the credibility of this knowledge, right? He's saying that this isn't just something that I made up when you ask me questions. These are timeless principles that have been around forever for all intensive purposes, right? This knowledge has come down from the dawn of creation. So it first says Krishna taught this knowledge to Vivishwan, right? And that's the sun god. He taught this knowledge approximately 120 million years ago. God taught this knowledge to the sun god, who then taught it to Manu, the progenitor of humanity. So Manu was like the first human. And then Manu passed it to Ishvaku, who was the king of the Earth planet. And that happened 2 million years ago. So that means this knowledge has been in human history for 2 million years, right? And then just 5,000 years ago, Krishna re-speaks it to Arjuna on the battlefield. And that's where we are now. So he's kind of setting it up here, telling us that this knowledge has been around forever. It's timeless. And he starts with Viveshwan, and he's the sun god. Right? The sun is the king of all the planets, which is controlling all the other planets by supplying heat and light to them. And the sun god was Krishna's first disciple. And the sun gives light to everyone, but Krishna gives light, the light of wisdom, to everyone, including the sun. Right? The sun illuminates the outer world and shows us how to move about in the world, right, from that illumination. But Krishna's wisdom answers the why questions, right? So the sun shows us how to move around in the world. Krishna's wisdom answers the wise questions. And Manu, so from the sun god, he gave the knowledge to Manu, he's considered the first human. And from him, the first king of the earth planet, Ishvaku started the solar dynasty. Okay, so for Arjuna, all of this is familiar, right? For us, this genealogy, it's not super significant. Like we don't need to like commit it to memory necessarily. It's not super important for understanding the Gita, but what is important is the teaching, right? And by mentioning this lineage, Krishna's emphasizing that true spiritual knowledge comes from a trusted, authentic source, right? It's not something that anyone can invent or distort. And this stresses the need for proper guidance under a genuine spiritual teacher. And many of us here on this call have these teachers in our life, are fortunate enough to have these teachers in our lives, because this is where this knowledge comes from. And in this, it's important to understand too that according to this tradition, we can't be our own guru, right? We can't be our own guru, and these are the reasons why. We as humans are prone to four defects. One is that we make mistakes, right? So we don't have perfect knowledge or judgment, and we're prone to misunderstanding the intentions of even the scriptures. The second one is that we can become under illusion or misconception, and from that we can be easily misled. Right? One example is we identify the body as ourselves, right? We do that every day, every minute, really. We're constantly identifying the body as ourselves, right? So we come under this illusion or this misconception. The others is we cheat others or ourselves. And we'll do this to protect our ego or for personal gain. And this will manifest as dishonesty or hypocrisy, right? And that leads to spiritual blocks. We talked about that in the last chapter. We talked about when we're not honest with ourselves, or it's bad not to be honest with others, but when we're not honest with ourselves, we're pretty much at a standstill from a growth perspective. And then we have imperfect senses. So the eyes can only see so far, the ears can only attune to certain frequencies. Our senses are limited as they are, right? So we're prone to these four defects. We make mistakes, we become under illusion or misconception, we cheat others, and we have imperfect senses. So the importance of a guru is that a guru is somebody who has already walked the path, right? They've already walked this path, and they can provide personalized guidance based on our unique needs, right? Without which we risk misinterpreting the scriptures or falling into self-deception, right? We talked about last class, was it last one or before that? How we have these inherent biases based on the desires that we have, and they're pulling us certain ways, and we see everything around us through the lens, through the filter of those desires, right? Whatever's on our mind, we start to see everywhere. And that happens to us. And due to these defects, we often carry misconceptions about spiritual truths, right? So based off of our conditionings, we see everything through the lens of them, including our spiritual path and our spiritual progression. And a guru helps remove that and purifies the heart. And it's funny, I was working on this class yesterday, and I realized after I made it that I didn't have any personal examples. And people are always commenting on like, oh, your personal examples help me to understand so much. And I was like, oh, that's fine. I just won't have them every time. Well, then last night I had this dream. I woke up this morning, I'm like, wow, I got to share that. I guess that's maybe my personal example for this class. So I'm going to share this personal example with you to kind of demonstrate the effectiveness of a guru. So when I came into spiritual life, I've talked about my like work history before. I'm pretty competent. Like I would always get really good performance appraisals at work. I never had a problem picking anything up. Things just come pretty easy to me in like an academic arena. But I have low self-worth, like pretty low self-worth. And that's something I struggled with my whole life. Right. So when I came into spiritual life and I learned about this component of service, subconsciously I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm super competent. And I had been to India, I experienced the magic of a spiritual connection. So my take was like, okay, you're telling me that the more service I do, the more spiritually connected I'll feel. right? So I was like, no problem. I can do that. I can pour my whole self into service and I can be super successful at it. And then I'll feel more of this like magical feeling that I feel when I go to India. Right. So this is like me placing my material misconception on spiritual life. So this is like number one, like defect. And the problem here is that I wasn't really evolved enough and that I wasn't really able to do that service from a place of complete detachment, right? So I was still looking for some level of validation and love. And if I didn't get it to the level that I felt like was reasonable, it would make me feel bad. I wasn't totally detached in that service. I wasn't selfless enough. And this showed, this came up. I saw this coming up. And when the service ended, I had a call with my guru. And it was a good long call. And I remember a couple things that he told me from this call. One, he told me basically that to let go of the service. And the other, he stressed to me, this I thought was really interesting. He told me that my husband loved me unconditionally. He said, "Well, you should invest, your husband really loves you unconditionally." And I knew I had a great husband, but coming from my guru, it just made me feel like, he was kind of like pointing that out to me, like an area in my life that I needed to invest in more, and he also kind of gave me other little, like drops along the way, like the mouse trail, they kind of are leading you with the little drops of food. I felt like as I reflect on different conversations with him, I remember being with him and telling him about all these great service plans that I was going to do. And I was like working with a group and it's like we're going to do all these things, and I remember him just kind of like looking away and looking up, like, and then he started talking about the cows or something at GEV. He was just like obviously not super interested in my ego telling him about all these plans that I was going to do. Um, so anyway, so after that service ended, I didn't get involved in another service for the couple years after that. And I just kind of like, this was the years I wasn't working and I was just studying and chanting and being home with my husband. And I also made really good friends with my god sister down the road who's been following this path for, 20 years. And she's just like such a beacon of like motherly love, like just she's really a special person. And anyway, my cup started to become more full. I had a stable family life. I had steady devotional practice. I didn't really feel like I needed much more. I felt like, oh, okay, now I'm feeling really like fulfilled and satisfied. And so then fast forward a couple years, and I was in India, and I got a couple of deities, and I happened to see Radhanath Swami that day. I happened to see my guru that day, and I later after I got my deities, I called him and it was like, can I come over and talk to you for a minute? And he said, oh, okay, sure. So I brought my deities over there and I asked him to do their first worship, to do their first puja. And so he did. And I myself was thinking like, okay, I'm doing exactly what he wants. I felt like, oh, he's going to be very pleased with me. And I didn't feel like he wasn't. But at the end, after that, after he, did the first puja for my deities and he named them, I was like, okay, thank you so much. I was trying to be conscious of his time, so I was kind of like trying to be quick, And he started talking to me about like one of his good friends who just died, and then a couple other people that were really struggling, and he just had so much like compassion as he's telling me this. And then I started to feel like just kind of silly, just kind of like stupid for taking this time for him because I felt like me and my stuff was so important. Meanwhile, he's dealing with like these pretty heavy things that people are going through. And I started to think like, okay, like that's really the point of all of this. It's not just to like sit in our house and get really grounded in our service. Like that's wonderful, our devotional service, chanting and reading and studying, but it's to really like develop compassion for God's children. Right? That's really what we're doing here. And he was I felt like he's kind of like showing me this, like little bit by little, like wherever I was, whatever there was that I couldn't see that I needed to kind of like move past, he was kind of helping clear that way for me. And then I started serving more with Veda, who is like the embodiment of compassion and all about service. I mean, you can't help but feel inspired to do service when you're working with Veda. But at this time, I knew, that my own limitations, that I needed to kind of take it slow, and I needed to kind of respect where my consciousness was and know where I was and what my motives were and not lose touch with that, because for me, when we talk about like these things like lust or things that pull us off the path, this is like, a kind of a dysfunctional habit that I created, to feel worth. I would just like achieve, achieve, achieve. And so I had to be careful to like get into when I was doing that, like, looking for validation and make sure I was coming back, redirecting to source and um, regulating myself in where I was with that. So this is my guru has been such like a staple and showing me this path, like again, wherever I am, even kind of like pointing out, like, I'm looking for this love, I'm looking for this reservoir of love, and I'm not quite to the point where, I can just be totally detached and have nothing and just and feel that with God, right? My spiritual practice is just not there yet. And I felt like he was kind of encouraging me to invest, in my family where I can access some of that, some of God's love. And in that way, I can develop more, not that that's the know all, not that that's the end all, but these kinds of like steady, healthy relationships help us to experience God's love in a reciprocal way that we can carry on, and can help us evolve in our relationship with God ultimately. And that's what having children is, we're their first guru, we're their first experience of God's love. So it's so important that's steady and stable. Um, so anyway, so this is what a guru should be doing for us. Even if you think you've got it all figured out, and maybe you do materially, maybe you're super qualified, spiritually, unless you've been on this path for ever and you've been dedicating a lot of time to it, and it's gonna be difficult. You're gonna come into those material misconceptions. You're gonna come into those anartas. That's what we call those knots in the heart. Those misidentifications with our body, with our ego. That we don't even know that it's our ego. Sometimes we get even convinced that it's not, but really it is. And a guru who has been practicing, who has purified themselves to the extent that they've uncovered this stuff within themselves, they can help us see it within ourselves so that we can evolve and we can grow and we can become more loving and compassionate and true selfless servants of God, right? And sometimes, that might not look like, where I was ready to commit 24/7 to service, but my heart wasn't full, you know. And my guru was able to see that and to kind of help guide me into something that, situations that would be better support for that. So it's interesting how these things can, it's not like a one size fits all. It's not like, but this is why we need a guru, to help us interpret these scriptures and apply them to our lives in ways that we're just not quite there yet. We're just not quite able to do, even if we think we can, even if you think you can, I'm going to tell you, you probably can't. You probably can't to the extent that somebody who's very realized can. So the other thing within a guru, they need to have connection to disciplic succession, right? The Sanskrit word for this is parampara. This is like, a teacher teaches a student, that student becomes the teacher, that student becomes a teacher, and the knowledge is passed down like that in like a flawless line. That's where the knowledge comes from. It ensures that the knowledge received is authentic and doesn't become distorted. Right. So if we accept a guru from a bona fide lineage, which is a tradition of this, again, it's not like people are just making this stuff up. It's a tradition that comes directly from Krishna, right? We become connected. So if we accept a guru from that lineage, we become connected to that chain of spiritual wisdom, which traces back to Krishna. So my guru was initiated by Prabhupada. Prabhupada has a guru, has a guru, has a guru. And literally, I could tell you the chain that goes all the way up to Krishna. And that's how this knowledge is passed down. Right. The other thing our gurus should do is awaken devotion, right? They don't just tell us intellectual truths, but they also awaken the dormant love for God. And this is considered the ultimate goal of bhakti yoga, which again, we haven't got into in the Gita yet. That's chapter 7 through 12. We'll get there, but this is considered the ultimate goal, right? And the nectar of devotion, again, this book that Prabhupada wrote from another book that Goswamis wrote, that is again bona fide. It teaches us that pure devotion is already present in everyone's heart, right? Through it, it gets covered. Our heart gets covered by ignorance, material desires, our ego, and therefore we have to uncover to reawaken this dormant love. And Prabhupada tells us that devotion is caught, not taught. And it's caught, not taught, meaning that you get it. It's transmitted by association with someone whose heart is already full of love. Right? So it's not like an intellectual exercise. Like, it is important to study these truths and they help us with our realizations. But this devotional heart, this devotional attitude, it's transmitted through that association with somebody that already has it. So and a guru, already has it. And you can catch that by serving them humbly and sincerely. We can absorb that guru's bhakti. And Prabhupada will give that example of an iron placed near fire, right? It becomes red hot. It's in the same way that, like, associating with someone whose heart burns with devotion has a transformative effect on the disciple's heart. Right? And so the guru also helps us by pointing out the unwanted desires and distractions in our heart that's keeping us from our true purpose. And again, something that I feel like when I just think back on my experiences, my conversations with my guru, it's like he sees things that I don't see, but he sees like the best in me, and he's constantly trying to like tap at that, in a very like sweet and subtle way, which happens to work for me, in that he just by just being that reservoir of unconditional love, and by just kind of pointing out things that are maybe not noticed or forgotten, to help along the path. So qualifications of a guru: they should set an example of devotion through their actions, their words, their character. They should have good knowledge of scriptures. They should be connected to disciplic succession in a bona fide lineage. Right? They should be striving to overcome these 4 defects that I talked about, and therefore be guided by their transcendental knowledge, not just, the material desires. And they should not be motivated by personal gain, but by compassion and desire to help others. This one's really important. You don't want to be paying your guru, right? You shouldn't, they shouldn't, and if you are donating money or something, it shouldn't be to the effect where, like, if you don't, they're not going to care for you as much. It should be, your guru is not motivated by personal gain. And I really felt this when, like, my guru could have encouraged me to do service endlessly and said, yeah, this is good. Keep going, keep doing the service. But I felt like he really cared about my consciousness. And I felt like he really saw where my consciousness was and was guiding me to elevate it. And even when I talked about, like, oh, we're going to do all these great things in service, like, he could care less. He's like, okay, where's your consciousness when you're doing that? And if your consciousness isn't where it should be, that would make it sustainable, then let's kind of rewire that a little bit. Let's kind of reassess. And that's a guru. They provide that personal care that's tailored to each student's needs. And then ultimately, they should have humility and surrender to God. Right? They're not claiming to be God. That's not what we're looking for. They're not claiming to be God or demanding worship for themselves, but they're guiding students to develop their own relationship with God. And that's a beautiful thing. Right? So how do we choose? How do we choose a guru? The first thing I always tell people is just to kind of look around, start watching people's lectures, start, going to people's classes, start just listening, observing, seeing where you connect, ask questions, try to develop a personal relationship with them. That's pretty important. If they put on retreats or if they have weekly calls or, if they have see if you can develop some kind of personal relationship. And then, most importantly, pray. Pray for guidance. Trusting that God will put whoever is meant to be in your life, at that particular time in your life for that. I just this week actually somebody was messaging me that somebody from the temple had recommended them a certain guru, and they have somebody else on their heart that they want to be their guru, but that guru isn't accepting disciples right now. And they said, how should I tell this so and so that recommended this other guru to me that I'm not going to do that because and I was like, your decision for a guru is your decision and your decision only. You don't owe anybody an explanation for who your guru is or who it shouldn't be. That's a 100% personal decision, and it should be. We should discern and we should feel where our heart is, and it's not something that you should be pushed into or doing because this person is, pressuring you, or it's a heart-to-heart connection, and it's a personal decision, and that's how it should be. So that's something else that's important to remember as well. It's not something you do because all your friends are doing or because this person is really popular, or it's something you should really feel in your heart after sincere observation, study, and prayer. And that's where it should come from. And if somebody wants to give you some advice or guidance, that's wonderful. Definitely consider that, definitely pursue that. But there's no like pressure for somebody else to pursue a certain guru, or that it can't work like that. And lastly, Prabhupada gives us a warning about false gurus. He frequently warns against self-proclaimed or materially motivated gurus. So we have to be careful. Not all gurus are as qualified, though they may act like it, right? They may be charismatic or knowledgeable, but lack true devotion and humility. So we have to use our discernment and even, learn the scriptures ourselves, like we're doing here, learn the scriptures. And so that you have something to measure. You say, okay, this is what it says, this is what he's teaching, this is how he's acting, and start to become a little bit discerning, and then listen to the heart. So that's 4.1, our guru class. We'll move on to 4.2 unless anybody wants to share anything. Does anybody want to share anything? Didn't even notice how blurry my camera is. I don't know why my camera does this sometimes. Okay, we'll move on to, might just have to deal with me having a blurry camera. I'm not quite sure what's going on. We'll move on to 4.2. 4.2 says, I'm having problems with my screen here. Does somebody have 4.2 up and want to read it? I'm having trouble seeing it on my screen. Does somebody just want to read it for me? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing then and just read it without. Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
I can't see it on your screen, but I have my book here.
Okay, great. Do you want to just read it for us?
Yeah. Chapter 4, text 2. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the point of Krishna in talking about this list is that normally the knowledge is ancient, but also ever available, always available for humans so that we can mold our lives accordingly. Right? And this is the system of disciplic succession. So we talked about it a little bit in the last verse. We'll just elaborate on it a little bit here. this disciplic succession, in that each student becomes a teacher, and the teacher gives knowledge to the next student who also becomes a teacher. So this system was there, but somehow it was disrupted by the power of time. So this verse is saying. And in general, when knowledge is being conveyed, it's important that teachers are competent enough to teach it, right? But since it got lost, Krishna's saying that he's now teaching it to Arjuna. So if we remember from the previous verse, this knowledge was originally distributed to humankind 2 million years ago, but somehow it got lost in the chain and so Krishna comes back to teach it to Arjuna again 5,000 years ago. And the principle here is that knowledge has to be communicated coherently. Right? So if someone's a doctor dealing with life and death, we need to know that they're actually well educated. Right? At a university, there's teachers and students, and the students will hear, and then eventually those students will become the next teachers. That's how teachers teachers become teachers, right? But if at some point the students aren't very good, they can't teach it and things become a mess. So something like this happened. That's what Krishna is saying. Some kind of break in the disciplic succession happened. And therefore, Krishna's come back to teach us again through this circumstance, this experience with Arjuna on the battlefield. The other thing that this verse mentions is this role of saintly kings, right? Because the Gita is spoken for the kings. And the reason is that so that the kings can uphold dharma as they rule their kingdoms, right? So Krishna mentions that that saintly kings followed this knowledge in ancient times, right? They weren't just political leaders, but they were also spiritually advanced and living examples of how to rule with dharma and devotion. And the Gita was meant for them. And this is something that's like hard for us to even conceive of in this day. But to be able to lead, to be able to rule an entire kingdom and have all the opulence at your fingertips, but be completely detached, right? You're just doing it out of responsibility. You're just doing it out of responsibility and service to God, right? Like Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira was the oldest Pandava brother. He's a perfect example of this. He's the king who took over after this war, after the Kurukshetra war. He took over and he accepted this duty to rule under God's guidance, right? And he saw this as a service to God and his people, and he ruled with complete detachment and compassion and justice. He's like known for this. And his leadership was solely based on these, to the extent where when it was time for him to walk away, he was ready. He was ready to walk away and commit his life fully to God. It was just like a stepping stone to get there. It was just like, okay, I'm going to do this service for God. And then at the end of my life, I'm going to walk away and shed my material attachments and go back to Godhead. So this is like an exemplary example that he was, but if we could imagine serving that selflessly, like where can we lead this way in our lives? Our children, it's a perfect example. That's like the ultimate example of selfless service. We're up every 2 hours feeding, like, what do I get? Maybe a smile. Veda was joking about that on his call the other day. But it's true, we do all of this and sometimes it's ultimately just thankless, but we do it anyway because we have that love in our hearts. And this is the kind of love that Yudhisthira has for God, and therefore God's children. And this is what even having children should teach us, that this is what we should aspire to, a level of compassion for humanity, like we have for our children, understanding that if we love God, God has this for his children, and we're his children, right? The other thing that we learned from this is that we notice that Krishna's not holding any specific person responsible for this loss, right? He's just saying by the power of time, these things happen, this loss of knowledge. And he's saying somehow disciplic succession was broken and I need to come back and give this knowledge again. But he's not like pointing fingers. He's not placing blame. He's not dwelling on why or who caused the break in the disciplic chain. But he's more just focused on the solution. He's just immediately addressing the solution. right? He's come to reestablish the knowledge. And this could be such a crucial lesson for us, in our relationships or our work life. When we come up to some kind of problem, how often, how quickly do we want to figure out who did it? Whose fault is it? Who left this out? This morning I come downstairs and there's carrots on the table. My husband went grocery shopping yesterday, left the carrots out. I'm like, I can't wait to tell him that carrots go in the fridge, right? I haven't told him that yet. This is the first time he's hearing that. So carrots go in the fridge, right? But instead of feeling like I need to tell my husband that carrots go in the fridge, just picking up the carrots, putting them in the fridge. Right? We don't need to argue over who left them out or right. We figure out a solution, we move on. And what we'll see too is when we're able to do this in our relationships or our work lives, it's empowering to other people. If you're working on a team and something comes up, instead of spending a lot of time figuring out blame, if you can be the one to say, you know what, it doesn't matter why this happened, let's just figure out how to get out of it. It could really pull a team together because, chances are everybody feels a little bit bad. Everybody feels a little bit responsible. But to kind of redirect the energy and the focus to something constructive, like what are we going to do about it? As opposed to kind of sitting in the yuck of let's find out who did it so that we can gang up on them, it can be very empowering for people and relationships. So, it's if we could all try to, practice this one thing this week, the next time something comes up that we just want to look, or we just, where our default mode is to say, who did this? And I want to let them know that they did it and that they made a mistake. If we could put that energy towards, all right, this is done. What are we going to do about it? And see what happens, right? See how our relationships transform. If we could practice that one thing. And the other thing, yeah, compassion and responsibility over judgment. That's what Krishna has here. He doesn't criticize humanity for losing the knowledge. Instead, he takes personal responsibility to restore it. And these are the qualities of a true leader, right? They're addressing the issues without resentment or judgment. The qualities of a true leader. Because also, what good does that do? What good does it do rubbing it in someone's face? Now, it might be, like with my husband, instead of, getting upset about it, putting the carrots in the fridge and then later saying, hey, babe, I noticed the carrots were out. Carrots, we're supposed to keep carrots in the fridge, right? Maybe correcting something so that in the future these things don't happen. But to like dwell on the why and the blame, it's really just quite a waste of energy, isn't it? And we ourselves had to discern between when we're, trying to be constructive and when we're kind of being a little bit petty, And then also understanding the nature of time, right? Krishna acknowledges that over time, systems and teaching can degrade naturally. And not because of any one person's fault even, but it's just the nature of the material world. So as we know that these things will change, degrade, or be forgotten over time, for us, this could be relationships, systems, traditions. Instead of lamenting this, we can just accept it as a part of life and work to restore or strengthen what matters. Yesterday, my husband and I were talking about the temporarity of everything. And, we love our dog. We love our little golden doodle. We were talking about how he's temporary. And I think my husband says something like, yeah, he's more temporary than Prema, but ultimately everything's temporary. We have to see things like that. I can't expect that my golden doodle is gonna, live as long as my daughter. And if we can again see everything in its right perspective, ultimately, even my husband and I's relationship is temporary, even though I get so much, love and stability from that, that's temporary. So while we have these things in our lives that are filling us up and, use this to really work on our relationship with what's enduring, which is our relationship with spirit, with God, right? Strengthen that such that when these other things fall away, we're strong. It doesn't make us fall also. Right? That's what we're doing here. So in this verse, Krishna is providing Arjuna the knowledge by which the tradition can be resumed. That's what's happening here. Not necessarily in this verse, but that's what he's saying here. Okay, last verse for today. 4:3. Does anybody want to share anything? Mariah, do you want to read 4:3 for us?
Yes. All right. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you because you are my devotee as well as my friend. Therefore, you can understand the transcendental mystery of this science.
Okay, so he's saying, I'm giving this knowledge to you, right? And it's interesting, he doesn't say I'm giving this knowledge to you because we're on a battlefield and you need to figure out if you're gonna fight or not. That's not why he's saying I'm giving this knowledge to you. He's giving more of a personal reason, right? He's talking more about Arjuna's specific attributes. He's a devotee and he's a friend. That's why he's giving him this knowledge. He's giving him more of a personal reason in terms of the qualification of Arjuna. And he's emphasizing his personal connection with Arjuna, highlighting, this is again super important for us, that spiritual knowledge is transmitted in the context of a close relationship. It's so cultivating a personal relationship with God through prayer, meditation, chanting is essential for understanding spiritual truths. This is how they're revealed, right? It's not something that it's like the more that you study without a heart of devotion, your realizations are going to be much more shallow than if you're studying and you're doing it out of relationship. Right? It's this is just the way that spiritual wisdom works. It's not like mundane material logic. Right? Relationship with divinity, it's a two-way connection of love and trust. And this trust is a prerequisite for the knowledge. Right? Krishna reveals to Arjuna because he trusts him. So trustworthiness and sincerity are essential for us to receive higher knowledge, right? If we want to grow spiritually, we should try to become more trustworthy, sincere, and devoted in our actions. And that's what will lead to our spiritual realizations and even for our opportunities for growth. Certain services that fall in your lap, certain opportunities to kind of upgrade your practice, certain association that you start, getting to be a part of. This is all divinely arranged for you to bring you closer to spirit, depending on where you are. Right? And it may change over time. These opportunities kind of come in and out and based off of what you need. But to the degree that you're sincere and you have that level of trust and devotion, God will create this plan for you to bring you in, right? And will reveal this knowledge to you in accordance with your capacity to understand. And we also see that as we're studying, what we're able to understand now is maybe completely different than what we would have been able to understand a year ago, even if we were sitting in the exact same class, right? Because we have our own biases, we have our own material biases, we have our own things that are on our minds that we can't see. We have our levels of faith, in what we're hearing. And as we start to kind of clear out some of those material biases and increase our level of our faith and sincerity to the practice, the more that we can really see there. Right? So that's for us, the students of the Gita, to understand that we need to have these similar qualifications, right? The devotional and friendly disposition towards God. And understand that spiritual knowledge is best understood by those who have the personal loving relationship with our teachers or with divinity, right? You can't learn from somebody that you resent, right? Or that you're envious of, or that you don't really trust. Right? This is why choosing your guru is so important. That's a personal decision. And we need to be mindful of these things, right? When we're choosing our guru, we need to make sure that our guru is qualified first off, and that relationship, we feel that kind of relationship. Even if we're not able to talk to our guru personally, we should feel a loving, a heart-to-heart connection with them. And that's how we understand these spiritual truths. That's how they're revealed when they're approached with love, faith, and humility. And the deepest knowledge and insights come through this trust and affection. So, therefore, our quality of relationships are crucial to gaining deeper understanding. And lastly, in this verse, Krishna calls this knowledge a transcendental mystery. Isn't that kind of mysterious? A transcendental mystery. It's like mystical, you know. It's not ordinary information that we can understand through logic. Again, you can't just say, okay, like I don't buy into any of this, but I'm going to become an expert on it all. Like it doesn't work like that. You know, we don't receive realizations that way. You know, we may be able to repeat something that we heard, but we're not gonna get the realizations that really help us to evolve and grow. We need to have the grace, the faith, and a purified heart to fully comprehend. And those things take time, right? That's like a gradual process. Again, it doesn't just happen overnight. I can't just say, okay, I'm gonna serve completely detached and compassionately and selflessly 24/7. And I'm just going to make a decision one day to do that and be able to do it. Like, no, it takes time to get to that level of spirituality, right? And it takes these things, a purified heart, grace, faith. And we should recognize that this spiritual knowledge, it's a gift, right? We're not entitled to it at all. If we're getting any of it, in fact, we don't even deserve it. You know, I know I certainly don't. You know, we don't deserve it, but it's a gift. We're gifted, and that's how we should see it, right? Anything that we get, even if you have these expectations of your guru to act a certain way or to, I remember when I was waiting to get initiated, I was like, I remember going through a period of being like angry at my guru for not initiating me when I was ready. And it's so funny to think of now, like who are we to expect anything or to decide, that's just us trying to be the controller again, that we know and that this is the way that it should be. Like, no, that's the whole point, right? Is that we don't. And that's how we develop faith and surrender. And again, choose carefully who you decide to have this with. But ultimately, there are qualified teachers out there that you can have this relationship with, and you can grow. And if we approach with gratitude and humility, and the more that we approach with this openness and this reverence, the more that they'll reveal their deeper meaning to us. And the capacity, we could grow unlimitedly to the degree that we're open and sincere and humble. So those are the verses for today. Mariah, do you want to share any of your realizations, reflections from the class?
I will try my best. Not too much is coming up. It was just such a beautiful class to hear. And I appreciate you sharing your realizations of like, there was a few. The first one was like, you realized you wanted to serve, but you realized your motive was still to like seek that validation. And um, and it's just like, that just shows such maturity to be able to recognize and see that in yourself, to be able to be like, yeah, I want to serve, but your motivation isn't actually pure. Your intention isn't pure. And it's just beautiful to see the journey of like how your Guru Maharaj like he was like, focus on this so that way your heart will become full. So then you can serve selflessly, So like how beautiful that journey was. And then at the end here, you're talking about we it's a gift, this knowledge that we have. It is such a gift. And we can't intellectualize it. Like we can learn it intellectually. And that's something I'm really realizing in my life is like how much like doing the practice. It's like, yeah, I had all this knowledge. I would read a lot, but now doing the practices, it's like embodying, it's like going deeper, and I'm like realizing it on deeper levels. And actually just yesterday I was at the temple and Michael and Alyssa were there and we were talking about that. Like changing it from like this intellectual thing of like, yeah, I know it, but actually bringing it into our heart as a practice and embodying it. And like, that's a whole nother level of knowing and understanding. And it only comes when we purify the heart and we open up the heart. And that's just what bhakti is. It's that beautiful process of opening our heart and receiving this knowledge and integrating it into our lives and letting it just change who we are, letting it chip
Mm.
away all of who we aren't, I guess we should say. But
Yeah. Wow. So beautifully said.
yeah, so that's just kind of some of the things that are coming to me today.
Oh,
But
that's so nice. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's a practice of the heart. And the intellect can be a tool, but ultimately it's a practice of the heart.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to share anything today? I see you, Trevor. You want to share anything today? No? Sometimes Trevor has things, sometimes he doesn't. You never know. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming and for sharing your hearts with us. And we'll see you on Thursday. Have a wonderful week.
Hare Krishna.